On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks go to Madison Square Garden on Wednesday evening for their biggest game of the season against the Knicks in the NBA Cup quarterfinal. We will preview the game and much more, and all of that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1864 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep in the night here on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show to make it your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you might find your podcasts. That includes Spotify and Apple, Amazon Music, Overcast, etc. And we're also on YouTube on the video side. So please like this video as you are watching it. And please do me a favor and subscribe on both video and audio to support the podcast. If you missed it, I did a podcast on Monday evening into Tuesday with Gavin Shaw of Locked On Knicks, sort of a crossover episode, posting sort of to look ahead a little bit to the game on Wednesday. That's a good companion to listen to alongside this podcast if you're still listening to this on Wednesday. But for the most part, this show will almost be entirely dedicated to the game between the Hawks and the Knicks on Wednesday evening. Usually, I would not do a preview, and if I did, it's usually like one segment, but this show is going to focus on the game because, look, the Hawks haven't played for 2 days, and it's a playoff-level atmosphere at this point in time. It's the knockout round for the Hawks. They play on Wednesday. If they win on Wednesday, they advance to Las Vegas, which would be very, very interesting if that were to happen, and I will be there when that happens, et cetera, and it'll be fun. Anyway, in the meantime, if the Hawks lose on Wednesday, they will play again on Sunday. We'll get into the details of that later on. But it's Hawks, Knicks, 7 o'clock start at MSG on Wednesday. And I'll answer some questions from kind of in the mailbag portion looking ahead to this game. So first things first, the question is from Ryan, who says, we've seen that the Hawks can beat the Knicks, but how much does that first game matter when predicting and projecting this one? So I'm going to use Ryan's question as an avenue to kind of rehash what actually happened in that first game between the Hawks and the Knicks. It's about 5 weeks ago. As I'm talking to you right now, when that game actually happened, it was in Atlanta and not New York. As he said, the Hawks won that game by 5 points. It was 121-116. And until the Boston upset without Trae, that was the big shocker. Before that, this Knicks was the best win of the season for the Hawks. They were really good in that game. They were 7-point underdogs coming into that game. In fact, it's the exact same point spread as we'll get to later on. The Hawks are 7-point underdogs again in this game. But the market's higher on the Hawks now, let's just say, because Atlanta is now 7-point underdogs on the road versus being 7-point underdogs at home. It was very, very close. And look, I went through my notes for that game and also watched parts of it again this week. It struck me that it was really close the entire way. In fact, neither team led by more than 8 points in the entire game. There were some runs on both sides, but it was really tight the entire way. And I think big picture, the defense was really strong for the Hawks in that first game with one notable exception. The Knicks made 22 threes, which was probably the reason why it was close, to be honest. They shot 47% from three, and that was in that period of time earlier this year where everyone was making every shot against the Hawks, which I was trying to downplay at the time and calm everybody down a little bit about the defense. Since then, things have normalized a little bit more, but the Knicks were taking a lot of threes and making a lot of threes in that game. It was a game one. They were unlucky for sure, but they did almost everything else well, I would say, on the margins. They buckled down in the fourth quarter. They had about 103 defensive rating in that fourth quarter, for instance, and they slammed the door defensively. It was a very close game. Offensively, though, the Hawks were pretty good in that game as well. Zachary Shea had his career best night with 33 points on 22 shots in that game. He was on fire. Obviously, not something you can bank on, but that's very, very helpful. And they were able to post a good offensive game, even with the backcourt of Dyson Daniels and Trae Young combining to shoot 10 of 37 from the field in that game. And the Hawks still won it and performed well on offense. If you heard the show yesterday with myself and Gavin of Locked On Knicks, you would have heard me say this as well and asked about the possession battle in our back and forth. And one reason I did that on that show is because the Hawks absolutely crushed the Knicks on the margins in that first meeting. They had 8 turnovers in the entire game. They had 27 second chance points. They won the free throw line. They ended up with 19 more shooting possessions in that first game than the Knicks did. And that is how they were able to win the game despite allowing 22 threes to the Knicks. Obviously, you don't want to give up 22 threes, but if you're going to do that, you have to overcome it somehow. And they did that by kind of just getting more shots to the rim the entire game. Zooming back out a little bit from that, kind of the details on that one, the Hawks were actually pretty weak as far as their bench and their availability and roster stuff for that game. They did not have DeAndre Hunter or Bogey or Vit Krejci or Kobe Buffkin. All those guys were still out in that period of time when the Hawks were very shorthanded. They played 44 combined minutes for David Roddy, Garrison Matthews, and Keaton Wallace in that game, and they won it. The Hawks were minus 18 in David Roddy's minutes in that game. In a game they won by 5. I almost feel bad for sharing this stat, but I think I have to on this podcast with that in mind. David Roddy's defense has been a problem this year. He's played about 388 possessions for the Hawks this year. They have a 127 defensive rating. That's so bad, of course. That's first percentile. The team's overall defense is actually quite good. In fact, they go from below average to above average if you just take out Roddy's minutes this season. So anyway, long story short, they were not whole in that game. They were very shorthanded. And as we get to later on, the Hawks have some injury uncertainty, unfortunately, for this second and more high-profile matchup. They have some guys listed as questionable, namely Jalen Johnson and Bogey are questionable to play. But even if one of them plays, the Hawks will be in a better situation than they were the first time around injury-wise. If they both play, it's not even close. And even if they're both out, it's not going to be great, obviously, but they're able to be competitive. And look, what I'll say about the first game, as we'll kind of look forward, is that you can't expect Ricochet to do that again. He was really, really good that night, made everything in sight. But the Hawks are just a different team when they have most of their key guys available, especially Hunter and Bogey. I think it's pretty clear at this point in time. For example, they are 7-3 when Bogey and Hunter both play this year. They are 9-3 when Hunter and Jalen both play. They're two best forwards at this point in time. They're 10-4 just with Hunter overall. So some of that's noisy, opponents, all that stuff, but it's obviously very clear at this point. They are so much better when they have their normal depth, as most teams are, but I think especially with the Hawks, with the drop-off that they have in a couple of different spots. And the Knicks are largely healthy, but in that first game, they had their top 6 available. And the Knicks, as I talked about yesterday with Gavin, are not a deep team. They only have 6 or 7 guys that they trust. One of them has been out this year, Mitchell Robinson, but everybody else, it's basically their starters and Miles McBride, and that's kind of it for the Knicks. And they all played in that first game. They played a lot of minutes. So if you want something to be encouraged by in this matchup, that first game is not a bad one to circle. It's one game, of course. You don't want to overrate it. I'll be the first to say that game does not tell you exactly what's going to happen in the second game. It's not that much more indicative than any other game would be. But the Hawks did have that confidence boost, perhaps, of beating a team that they're about to face. They're 1-0 against them this year, and they did it while they were shorthanded and didn't even play that well on offense in a lot of ways. So just that's a long-winded answer to the question, but that's a good kind of indicator. And, of course, you don't always have that recent result to draw on, but I recommend if you have time as you listen to the podcast on Wednesday to maybe take a peek at what happened in that game if you are a sicko like me that enjoys watching games back, and that might be pretty interesting to kind of inform what's going to happen in the rematch. All right, more to come in a second. Questions from Steve and Kelly, et cetera, injury report stuff, point spread stuff, matchups, keys to victory, and more. But first, a word from our partners on the show. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get on the NFL, NBA action, and much more this season with FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and right now, if you are a new customer, you can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is also really easy to use. It gives you everything that you need to place your bets all in one place, and they have all the stuff you're looking for across the sports betting space, from over-unders to point spreads, money lines, player props, and game props. They have future bets. Same-game parlays are always popular right now. Live betting, and so much more. The app at FanDuel is safe. It's secure. They cover the entire range of sports as well. That includes the NBA, the NFL, college football, which is big right now with the playoffs starting soon, MLB, WNBA, hockey, golf, tennis, all kinds of soccer leagues. They have F1 and NASCAR on the auto racing side, boxing, MMA, and so much more. And now is an awesome time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And the place to go is FanDuel.com to get started with $150. That's $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com, and $150 bonus bets when you win a first $5 bet that you're placing at FanDuel Sportsbook. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, question from Steve, who says, how much does this week's light schedule help or hurt the Hawks? So for reference, the Hawks only have one game in at least a 5-day period this week. If they win on Wednesday against the Knicks, they will play Saturday in the semifinals in Las Vegas. If they lose on Wednesday, they won't play again until Sunday. And now, by the way, we know who they're going to play. If they lose, they will play at home against Orlando, because Orlando lost to Milwaukee in the other Eastern Conference quarterfinal game today. So if the Hawks win, they'll play Milwaukee in Vegas. If the Hawks lose, they will play Orlando at home in a regular rescheduled game that will still count in the standings, but will not be part of the cup anymore. But I'll just say this. If they lose on Wednesday as well, they'll be guaranteed to play exactly. This is a crazy stat. They will play 2 games in 10 days. So to Steve's question, it is a light schedule to be sure. And even if they win on Wednesday, they will play a max of 3 games in a 10-day period. And that's if they win the semifinals. So this is a very light as far as like game action schedule. Now, of course, if they keep winning, they're high intensity games. They're playoff level intensity games. But they have some time off here to kind of refresh. I think it'd be more controversial in some corners of the fan base if they had won on Sunday, what I'm about to say now. Because they lost, it won't be. But I'm very sure I would have heard if they won on Sunday that it was bad for the Hawks to have time off because they were winning, and that's what happens. Like, you want to have the rhythm and all that stuff, momentum, etc. Now they lost. I'd say it's easier to make the point that I probably already would have made, honestly, that it's good to have some time off. After Sunday's loss to the Nuggets, the Hawks have played 25 games. Only one team in the league have played more games than the Hawks at that moment in time. It was 26. So they've been very, very busy this year. Not a lot of time off in between games, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, you have guys with nagging injuries. You have Jalen on the injury report. You have Boogie on the injury report. You have Trae with the Achilles. Hunter's knees are always a question mark. Like, it's good to have those guys get some extra time. You know, Capella's an older guy, et cetera, et cetera. Still a few weeks away now, but they also have a long and grueling West Coast trip coming up at the end of the year. So you want to bank some wins, get your legs back a little bit. All of that's probably good. I am cognizant you don't want to be rusty. That's always important too. You want to keep the momentum rolling, especially if they won on Sunday. But because the loss on Sunday, like, that particular carrot is not really on the table anymore. So overall, I would say it's a good thing to have a light little bit of scheduling here. It's a long season. I know people don't always appreciate that. It's like you look at the game in front of you. But in talking to people in the league, players, coaches, training staff, support staff, it's a long season. And nobody wants to hear that because they're making a lot of money. I get it. But it is very taxing mentally and physically. So when you can have time off to reset, it's usually a good thing. And that's kind of what this is going to be for the Hawks, win or lose on Wednesday. Question from Kelly, who says, I'm supportive of the NBA Cup. It seems like a lot of people don't care or don't care yet. My question is, do the teams care? Do the players care? Or is it just another game for them? It would not change my enjoyment of it at all, but I'm curious what you have heard about the players and coaches. Look, I would say the teams and the players definitely care. That's not up for debate. On the whole, they definitely care about this. There is a range of how much they care, if that makes sense. You can see how kind of teams treat the NBA Cup during the group stage games. I will always point this out that I like this rule, but teams have to care to some degree because the games also count in the standings. So it would be harder to sell teams and players to count and care about this early on if it didn't already count in the standings. These games all count, so that makes it a little bit easier. No incentive otherwise, but it's one of those things. So on the Hawks side, they do care. They cared last year too. They didn't do as well last year, of course, but they do care to some degree. Up and down the roster, everyone is invested. For reference, Quinn Snyder talked to the media this week and basically just kind of pointed out the reality that, like, it's not just another game. Like, there's a little bit of extra juice to the game on Wednesday. And this is the quarterfinal. If it gets even further than that, it probably grabs up even more and more and more beyond that. He was not talking about like it was the finals. Like, that's important to note. It's not the NBA finals. Everyone knows that. But he did acknowledge, like, it's single elimination. You might treat it a little bit differently in some ways, preparation-wise. That's something I pointed out already on the show this week. But, like, teams are not able to game plan a ton. Obviously, you do a little bit of that. They're scouting all those things. But the games just come over and over again. You don't have a lot of practice time. But this situation, like, you can actually prep a real playoff-level game plan for this kind of game, which is interesting. And that's kind of different. Bogey gave a funny quote this week that happens to be true. He said it with a smile, but the quote was, I'm going to read the whole thing here. I think when you're winning a group, it's always exciting. Last year, when we were losing, we didn't like it. When you win, you like it. When you lose, you don't like it. It's normal. End quote. So obviously it's a little bit fun, that's tongue-in-cheek for Bogey, but obviously everyone has more fun when they're winning, but they do care about winning the games. So there's more attention on it now locally because they did well in the group and they won the group, but guys do care. For the record, there is money on the line for the players. Now, it matters less when you're talking about guys like Trae or Capella or guys who are making $20 million, haven't made $20 million for a long time, Hunter. But there are guys like V. Krejci, Garrison Matthews, guys who play for the Hawks who are not making massive money And if they were to win the cup or even make the final, like, that's real money for them. Like, it's a lot of money for you and I, but it's even notable money for the guys who are on the lower end of the salary spectrum in the NBA. So that matters too. Plus, the reality is, players in the NBA are professional athletes for a reason. Coaches, same thing. They are very competitive people in general. Like, obviously, there are some people, some players that are just so naturally talented or physically gifted that they can kind of get to the NBA without being maniacs. But most of these guys, and I say that very lovingly, most of these guys are competitive maniacs because they kind of have to be to get there, especially the coaches. Coaches are maniacs, generally speaking. So I'm sure it doesn't hurt that guys want to get to Vegas too. Like, players want to get to Vegas for a few days. That doesn't hurt, obviously, if they make the semifinals. But overall, I would say plainly that teams and players definitely care. They still care less about this than the playoffs, but it's more than the regular season, if that makes sense. Like, it's certainly in the middle. And player by player might be different, but Wednesday's game will be the biggest game they've played so far this season. And I've already had people kind of eye roll that to me. But look, I'm not saying it's the finals, but compare this game to any regular season game, like, it's a little bit more. Everyone kind of knows that it is what it is. There's some extra kick. Like, for example, the Hawks were rooting pretty openly for Boston in that final cup game day against Chicago because they wanted to advance. They cared about advancing. And how much they care, again, up for debate, but they do care a little bit. And the Hawks were also watching the game between Orlando and Milwaukee closely tonight to see who their actual opponents are going to be. So they know now it'll be the Bucks. Honestly, if you were the Hawks tonight, if this is me talking now, I would have hoped for the Magic to win because the Magic are banged up right now. But the Bucks won. We'll see. All that matters is what's in front of them on Wednesday. And last thing here, I would say that the extra kick is definitely the case once you get to the knockout rounds. Like, I covered the semifinals and the finals last year in Vegas. I do cover more than the Hawks. People always forget that, but I do cover the league in general. And I was there last year. I'll be there this year, whether the Hawks are there or not. And teams definitely cared a lot. Like, you could tell talking to players, talking to support staff, once you get to the knockout round, it's definitely up a level or two. So we'll see how that goes on Wednesday. It was playoff level intensity is what I would describe it as last year in the cup games. Elimination games, playoff level, maybe first round level, how you want to say that. But long story short, players and coaches do care about this, and we'll see their best effort. Hopefully, that does not ensure that you're going to play well, of course, but they will be tuned up, and I would imagine ready to play on Wednesday. All right, more to come when it comes to the matchup in a second, plus some injury updates and FanDuel projections, et cetera, keys to victory. First, though, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by GameTime. It is awesome to attend sporting events live. I'm lucky enough to do that all the time, honestly, for work purposes. But even when I'm going for not work purposes, there's a sensory experience to being at games in person that you just cannot replicate. And at GameTime, you get tickets across the board for all kinds of sporting events, including basketball games, football games, hockey games, baseball games, etc. Plus tickets for music, comedy, theater, and more. They have a new feature called GameTime Picks at GameTime as well that makes getting tickets even easier and better for you to see your favorite teams play live. And GameTime Picks, they only show you the incredible deals on great seats. They just take out all the fluff and save you a ton of time on searches that you actually don't really need to do. And for example, there are deals available right now that are awesome for the Hawks games at GameTime, including a pair of tickets right now for $39 each, including fees for the game at home against the Bulls on the day after Christmas. Holiday game against the big market team, $39 each, including fees. Pretty awesome deal there. And there's more of that all the time at GameTime. I love the feature personally that you turn on to view all the seats through the all-in pricing, so there are no surprises at the end of the checkout process. They also have the lowest possible price guaranteed at GameTime. Take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets with the folks at GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and use that code. It's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the GameTime app today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, so no more mailbag questions, but certainly some input that I got from questions, let's just say. I looked back earlier in the podcast in the first matchup. We'll end it up with some more conventional preview analysis here. Even if I think the first game is notable and can tell some things, particularly on the way the Hawks can win this game, it doesn't tell you everything. So I want to say this very plainly. The Knicks are good. They're favored for this game. They're favored this game for a reason. They're 15-9. They're 6th in the NBA in net rating. They're number 1 in the NBA in offense. One more time. They're number 1 in the NBA in offensive rating right now. Top 6 in the league in net rating, but number 1 in offense. That may not continue, but I think they were definitely a top 5 offensive team when they are available and healthy, as they are projected to be right now. They're number 2 in true shooting. They're top 5 in turnover rate. That's obviously really good as a baseline for your good offense. Where they are not as good as they have been in previous years is like on the offensive glass. It's still probably the best offensive team for the Knicks in my lifetime. Maybe that, well, at least my adult life. Maybe the 1 year with Melo 10 years ago or so. This is very much up there for them. Defensively, though, they are markedly worse than they have been in the past, which is the price you pay when you add Karl-Anthony Towns as your primary center. I think they also misevaluated Mikal Bridges a little bit, who's not a great defender anymore, but they are good on the glass. They don't foul, but they don't really create havoc anymore. They're in the bottom third of the league in opponent shooting. They're 29th in the league, second worst in preventing corner threes, and bottom 5 in three-point rate allowed. So the Hawks should be able to get some good looks from three. Now, they're not great as a shooting team, Atlanta, this year, but we saw that in the first matchup with Ricochet. The Hawks will get some good looks, and it'd be helpful if they made them, obviously, in this game. They do get back on defense to the Knicks, in part because they don't really turn the ball over ever, but they're not great in half-court settings. So in theory, the Hawks should be able to score effectively. Trae Young is comfortable at MSG. They don't have very good rim protection with Karl-Anthony Towns. They do have a couple of good perimeter defenders, and OG Anunoby, Miles McBride, to kind of throw at Trae. But when they do that, you should have some favorable stuff for Hunter, maybe Jalen if he plays, et cetera, et cetera. Speaking of Jalen, and I'm recording this podcast late Tuesday night, so keep that in mind. But right now, Jalen Johnson and Bogdan are listed as questionable. And honestly, I would have bet money that they're going to be listed as questionable no matter what, because they missed the game on Sunday. So the Hawks can go with that shroud of mystery. We just don't know really anything about these guys. Bogey did speak to the media this week, probably a good indicator there on some level. Jalen did not. They do need both of these guys, obviously, but Jalen in particular, the Hawks have been terrible. And I'm not using that flippantly. They've been terrible without Jalen. Minus 12 net rating with Jalen off the court this season. They do not play well without Jalen. So that's a big, big one, obviously. Bogey's a big one too, but Jalen's even bigger. A lot of people I saw from Hawks fans when I kind of shared the injury report first on Tuesday night was people assuming that they're all going to play. And by all of them, I mean really Bogey and Jalen. I am not as sure as Hawks fans are, but that's probably because I've covered the team for a long time. I've learned not to assume things, even if people think, oh, big game, they're going to play. There might be a real injury. Jalen Johnson in particular, like we saw him in a wrap. I shared that information the day before. He missed the game on Sunday. He might play. I'm sure if it's close, he's going to play or try to play. Same with Bogey. But because they're listed as questionable for a reason. Questionable is questionable. Unless I hear otherwise, I won't assume they're going to play. But we'll keep that in mind. Speaking of which, Hunter and Trae are probable. Those guys I would project to play unless something changes. Notable there. But Jalen's the swing guy. Josh Hart is questionable for the Knicks. Same thing. I think he probably plays or at least wants to play, but when you're questionable, you're questionable. And he's a starter level guy for the Knicks. Cat is probable for New York, and there's still without Mitchell Robinson, who has been missing all year long. So long story short, I teased this earlier out, but the Hawks are 7-point underdogs according to our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. So that's not a massive number. The Hawks have won games this year as a bigger underdog than that. For example, the first game against the Knicks, same spread. They were huge underdogs against the Celtics. The road game against Cleveland. So they've had even Milwaukee was about the same number. So they're not in a spot where they can't win, but they are notable underdogs. It's a road game, and the Knicks are better so far this year. They have better numbers than the Hawks do, and the Hawks won the first matchup. But as far as the overall profile of the teams, New York is seen as the better team, which does make sense on some level. As far as the keys to the game, I don't always do this, but I think it's probably, again, appropriate for a game like this. I would circle the possession battle overall. Now, if you're listening to the show regularly, you would know that I love pointing this out because I think it's a huge, huge factor possession-wise. And the Hawks won that game the first time around almost exclusively because they dominated the margins. But one attribute I would say is the turnover margin in this game is a big one. The Knicks are really good at not turning the ball over on offense. They're top 5 in the league in prevention of turnovers. And the Hawks are not awful at committing turnovers, but they're not where they have been in previous years. They're turning the ball over more this year than they have in the past. Now, the first game, they only had 8 turnovers the entire game, which is a great, great number. If they do that again, you're in great shape. But if you don't at least keep it close in turnover margin, that might be bad for Atlanta. But the Knicks don't run a lot on offense, but when they do run, they kill you. So the Hawks cannot afford the live ball giveaways. In fact, the Knicks are number 3 in the league in transition efficiency overall and number 2 in efficiency off of steals. The Hawks cannot afford to give them runouts and live ball turnovers. So circle that one. This one I will attribute to my friend Glenn Willis of 18-129, who's been banging this drum for a while. But the Hawks need to be putting Jalen Brunson, the Knicks small guard, in bad spots defensively. And I would also personally add Karl-Anthony Towns to that list as well. There are 2 weak spots for New York's defense, and it's Brunson and Towns, 1 and 5. Plain and simple. They also want to tax Brunson as much as possible to make him tired, because obviously same thing as Trae on the other side of the floor. Like, teams always want to attack small guards. You wear them out, make them work, etc. That's an important thing for the Hawks to at least try to do in this game. I could do all this stuff all day long as well. I will stop giving keys to the winning right now, but I'll end with this. The Knicks cannot be taking 53s in this game. I know they took 47 in the first matchup. The Hawks were lucky to win in some respects because they got bludgeoned from three-point range. They had to be awesome everywhere else, and they were. But it's hard. You make life harder on yourself when that happens. Accuracy gets all the headlines from three. People point it to the percentage first, and I get that. I get that totally. But there is a strong correlation in the NBA right now between three-point attempts and success. It's not always exactly that, but that is a strong indicator a lot. And running the Knicks off the line is important because they don't take a ton of them in general, but they're number 2 in accuracy. And if you allow 48, 50, 53 attempts, they might shoot you out of the game. That's possible. So again, you'll have a hard time winning if they make 23s again. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So this isn't a key to winning, but I'll also be interested to see how the Hawks handle the rotation. Obviously, the injury stuff is unavoidable. Let's say, for example, Jalen doesn't play. That's already not good, but how do they navigate it if Jalen doesn't play? Against the Nuggets, Jalen's absence was massive, very clearly massive. But it was easier to, at least in theory, play Larry Nance at the 4 because Denver is really big. New York isn't. So if Jalen doesn't play, do they go smaller? Do you see David Roddy? Do you see more of the wings? Do you see more of Hunter? Maybe Hunter starts at the 4 and plays a lot of minutes. Beat Krejci. I don't know what they would do there, but that's something to keep in mind. Same with Bogey. Like, if Bogey doesn't play, do you play Garrison Matthews? Do you play Beat Krejci? Do you play both? Kobe Buffkin, does he come back in the rotation? That's a question that I would have after he probably was, in my mind, he was missed on Sunday. You do have two days rest before and 2 days rest after, no matter what. So where do the minute totals land? How much does Trae play? How much does Dyson play? Jalen, if he's going to be healthy and available in this game, how much can Hunter play realistically? So all those are questions that I'm just asking. I don't really have insight on them other than just to like see what things will break. But it's a playoff level game. And the first time this year that the Hawks will actually have a playoff level situation where they can kind of look, all right, we're going to go at it this time. We're not going to hold back. Doesn't mean everybody's going to play 45 minutes in the game, but Dyson Daniels is a huge factor. I talked about a lot yesterday on the show with Gavin, but Dyson Daniels should probably just be mirroring Jalen Brunson the entire game. If it's me, Dyson is on the court if Jalen is on the court for the Knicks. The whole game. Barring foul trouble or whatever else. But how do they navigate that? So it's something I'll talk about after the game, I'm sure, no matter what happens. But I'm looking to see how the Hawks handle you never want to use the word must win, but for NBA Cup purposes, if they want to advance, they have to win. Like there's no margin of error. It's single elimination, and it'll be a very interesting data point, if nothing else. All right, everybody. That's all I have on a relatively short version of this podcast, still about half hour or so. Please stay tuned. I will have a podcast after the game on Wednesday, and then we'll see what happens after that. If the Hawks, again, one more time, if the Hawks win Wednesday, they will be playing in Las Vegas on Saturday against the Bucks. I will be there for that game if it happens. If the Hawks lose on Wednesday, they will not play again until Sunday. That game will be at home against the Orlando Magic. That's what we know right now, and there's nothing in between those. So no matter what, no game on Thursday, no game on Friday, and we'll see from there. But I'll cover you the entire way. I'll have it all broken down in this podcast, as I always do. So please subscribe to Locked On Hawks anywhere you find your podcasts, Apple and Spotify, also on YouTube. Please like this video as you're watching it to do me a favor in the algorithm. Comment if you'd like to and say positive things about the show. That's very much appreciated as well. Please follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. I'm also on Blue Sky at BT Rowland. And please also follow my non-podcast Hawks coverage at patreon.com/BT Rowland. I'll sign off now. I appreciate you listening to the podcast, and we'll see you after the game on Wednesday.